My son said, I sold your house to pay for a vacation for me and my wife. You have just one day to pack your things. I just smiled quietly because he had no idea the house was never really his to take. I'm so grateful that you're here with me, listening to my story. Please like this video and stay with me till the very end. And I'd love to hear from you. Tell me which city you're watching from so I can see just how far my story has reached. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my small but tidy living room. I was sipping my first cup of coffee, the aroma comforting, when the phone rang. My hands shook slightly as I answered, thinking it might be my neighbor with some mundane request. Instead, it was Brian. Mom, his voice was tight, but there was a strange excitement underneath. I need to tell you something important. I set down my cup, sensing a tremor in the calm of my morning. What is it, Brian? There was a pause, a breath that felt heavy with unsaid words. I sold your house. The words hit me like a physical blow. My heart stuttered. What? What do you mean sold my house? He swallowed audibly, and I could hear Tiffany in the background, her laughter clipped and urgent. I had to, Mom. I had no choice. Me and Tiffany, we needed this. A vacation. Somewhere we could breathe, live a little. You wouldn't understand. I could barely move. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Brian, my house, your home since childhood, my home for decades. What did you do? You have one day to pack, Mom. I've already arranged the movers. It'll all be over by tomorrow. His tone was casual, almost rehearsed. The words burned into me. I could feel the years of trust and love dissolving in seconds. I hung up and stood motionless, staring at the pale walls of the room that had held so many memories. I thought of the Christmas mornings, the birthday parties, the quiet evenings reading together. All of it gone in a sentence. My throat tightened. I could hear Tiffany giggling behind the line, and it made my chest ache with betrayal. I called Sarah immediately. My lawyer, my friend, the one person who had consistently reminded me that my autonomy mattered. She picked up after a few rings, her voice steady and calm. Margaret? Sarah, he sold my house. Brian, he sold it. And he's giving me one day to pack. My voice cracked, a mixture of rage and disbelief. There was silence for a moment, just long enough to make my blood pressure spike. Then Sarah spoke, steady as ever. All right, first breathe, we're going to handle this. You are not alone, Margaret. This is a crime, we will stop it. I sank into the armchair, my mind racing through the possibilities. Could he really have done this without my signature? Without the paperwork signed in front of witnesses? Impossible, I told myself, but the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, emails, and frantic research. My neighbors, Helen and Clara, came by immediately, their expressions grim as I recounted the call. They offered hugs, cups of tea, and the kind of words that can't undo what's been done but can remind you that you aren't alone. Helen's hands gripped mine tightly. Margaret, we've all faced selfishness in our families, but you are not powerless. Not now, not ever. We'll help you fight this. Clara, the retired police officer, furrowed her brows. If he's tried to transfer the deed or access your finances without your consent, it's fraud. Full stop. We need evidence, Margaret. Receipts, statements, anything that shows you still have control. I nodded, my mind already organizing the chaos into strategy. I dug out the original deeds, mortgage papers, and my bank statements. Each piece of paper felt like armor against the tidal wave of betrayal. By late afternoon, I had drafted an initial email to Brian, my fingers trembling over the keys. This is unacceptable. You have no legal right to my property. You will not touch a single asset without my explicit consent. I will be contacting my attorney immediately. I hit send, and a small spark of control returned to me. That evening, I walked through the garden, letting the scent of roses and jasmine calm the storm in my mind. I realized that my independence, my dignity, and my years of careful management were under attack, and I would not surrender them. Not to Brian, not to Tiffany, not to anyone. The night was long, filled with insomnia and 100 imagined confrontations. But as the moonlight spilled over the hydrangeas, I made a promise to myself. I would fight. I would not be a victim. And somehow, I would make sure that my son learned that betrayal comes with consequences. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The betrayal still sat heavy in my chest, but it was tempered by resolve. I brewed a strong cup of coffee. Sitting at the kitchen table, my documents spread in front of me like a shield. Deeds, mortgage statements, credit card records, everything meticulously organized. If Brian thought he could act without consequences, he had another thing coming. I called Sarah first thing. Sarah, I've gathered everything. The deeds, the mortgage statements, all bank transactions for the last 5 years. He doesn't get a single step without being stopped. Her voice was calm, reassuring. Good, Margaret, that's exactly what we need. We'll move swiftly. You're in control here. I'll start drafting the legal documents to halt any transfers immediately. The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. Emails flew, phone calls were made, and I felt the adrenaline pulse through my veins. I contacted my bank and the title company, explaining the situation. My son is attempting to sell my property without my consent, I said firmly. There was a pause on the line, then a quiet acknowledgement. We will place a freeze on all transactions until we receive further legal documentation, the bank representative assured me. Relief washed over me like a cool tide. By midday, the house felt alive with tension and expectation. Helen and Clara had come by, bringing tea and reassurance. Helen placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. We'll be with you through every step, Margaret. You are not facing this alone. Clara, ever practical, was pacing by the window. We need witnesses. You never know when they'll try something drastic. Let's document every call, every message. Take screenshots, keep receipts. We cover every angle. I nodded, already thinking ahead. Every conversation with Brian or Tiffany would be recorded. Every email forwarded to Sarah. I felt a strange mix of anger and calm. Anger at the audacity, calm from the knowledge that I was prepared, fortified, and not isolated. Later in the afternoon, the first attempt at confrontation came. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Tiffany, holding a bouquet of flowers, her smile strained and artificial. Mom, please, we just want to talk, she said, voice sweet but insincere. Brian didn't mean to upset you. We can fix this. I stepped back, closing the door firmly. You are not welcome here. I've contacted my attorney. Any further attempts to access my property or manipulate me will be documented and reported. My voice was steady, resolute. Helen, who had followed me to the door, nodded approvingly. Good, no negotiations. No guilt trips, you've got all the power here, Margaret. As the sun began to set, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. The crisp air cleared my mind. I realized that the real battle wasn't just legal, it was emotional. Brian had tried to weaponize our past, to exploit love for selfish gain. But I wasn't the same woman who had once relied on his affection for validation. I was strong, independent, and clear-eyed. That evening, I drafted a message to my support group. I needed their guidance, their perspective. Friends, I am facing a severe case of financial exploitation by my own son. Any advice, resources, or contacts you can provide would be greatly appreciated. This is urgent. The replies came quickly, full of empathy and practical advice. Names of elder protection agencies, legal aid contacts, and personal experiences filled my inbox. I realized how many people had endured similar betrayals and how rarely they spoke out. The next day, a formal cease and desist letter from Sarah arrived at Brian's office, sent via certified mail. The language was precise, legal, and uncompromising. Any attempts to transfer the house, access my finances, or intimidate me would result in immediate legal action. I felt a satisfaction that was both bitter and empowering. Brian called that evening. Mom, can we talk? His voice sounded smaller, almost tentative. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded the call recording to Sarah and saved it in my secure folder. It was crucial to document every interaction. I spent the night reflecting on everything. Betrayal, deception, greed, they were all words that had once seemed abstract, theoretical. Now they were painfully concrete, embodied in the son I had raised. But with that realization came power. I knew my rights, I knew the law, and I had Sarah, Helen, Clara, and the community around me as witnesses and support. As I lay in bed, the moonlight spilling across the covers, I resolved something vital. This wasn't just about stopping Brian. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, protecting my legacy, and ensuring that the years I had worked so hard for could not be stolen by anyone. The path ahead would be difficult. There would be lies, manipulations, tears, and attempts to guilt me, but I felt ready. For the first time since the phone call, I slept without fear. The storm had come, but I was prepared to face it head on. The following morning brought a flurry of new developments. I awoke to a message from Sarah. The court had accepted the initial filing to temporarily freeze any property transfers. The relief was immediate, but the reality of what lay ahead weighed heavily. This was just the beginning. Helen arrived with a thermos of tea and a small notebook. We need a plan, she said firmly, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Step 1, anticipate every move Brian and Tiffany might make. Step 2, document it. Step 3, respond strategically, never emotionally. I nodded, appreciating her methodical approach. We spent the morning reviewing all correspondence, categorizing each attempt by level of threat. Emails, text messages, social media posts, and even voicemails were logged meticulously. I learned to treat each communication as potential evidence. The mental shift was profound. I went from feeling attacked and vulnerable to feeling like a commander overseeing every move in a battle I was prepared to win. By early afternoon, the first public attempt at manipulation came. A neighbor, casually chatting over the fence, mentioned seeing Brian and Tiffany walking around the property earlier that day, peeking into windows. I felt a flash of anger, but Helen reminded me to stay calm. Document it, take photos. This is exactly what we need for your case. I retrieved my phone and discreetly photographed the property from my garden, the images showing no one trespassing, but the effort alone provided a sense of control. Later, I drafted a detailed note for Sarah about the neighbor's observation, ensuring every detail was recorded. That evening, the emails began again. Tiffany's first was subtle, almost gentle. Mom, I'm concerned about your health. You don't answer your phone. You've always been independent, but we just want to help. Please, can we meet? I read it over a cup of chamomile tea. Her tone was calculated, designed to trigger guilt. I forwarded the email to Sarah and wrote a measured reply. Tiffany, I appreciate your concern. However, any communication must be through my attorney. I will not engage in private discussions at this time. I hit send, feeling the power of boundaries for the first time. Sleep did not come easily. I found myself replaying moments from the previous months. The initial shock of Brian's declaration, the Maldives vacation payment, the moving company incident. The emotions were raw, but each recollection strengthened my resolve. I realized how much I had underestimated the lengths some people would go to exploit those they claimed to love. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. My financial advisor, Mr. Jacobs, called after hearing about the situation from Sarah. Margaret, you've done everything right, he said warmly. I've seen elder financial exploitation cases before, and you've documented every possible angle. You are in a strong position, legally and financially. His reassurance bolstered my confidence. By midweek, Brian's tactics escalated. A series of social media posts appeared, showing carefully cropped photos implying I was alone, isolated, and struggling. Each post was shared by mutual acquaintances with sympathetic captions. Helen and Clara were quick to remind me, ignore the noise. These are manipulation attempts to create doubt and pressure. Keep documenting. I started maintaining a private journal, detailing every interaction, every feeling, every observation. The act of writing helped me process not just the legal battle, but the emotional toll. I realized that fear, anger, and grief could be transformed into strategy, insight, and power. Then came the phone calls. Brian's voice alternated between pleading and rage, sometimes within the same conversation. Mom, I just want to fix this. We can work together. We don't want to fight. I listened silently, documenting everything. Sarah advised never to answer without recording. Each time he called, I felt a mix of sadness for the son I had known and disappointment in the man he had become. Evenings became my sanctuary. I returned to my garden, pruning roses and tending the hydrangeas. The physical labor was therapeutic, a way to reclaim control over my environment, while the battle for my home and independence raged in the background. The act of nurturing life around me contrasted sharply, with the deception and greed attempting to infiltrate my life. One afternoon, Sarah delivered another piece of news. The court had scheduled a preliminary hearing to review Brian's claims. Margaret, this is where we show the court everything you've been doing to protect yourself, she explained. Your documentation, the bank records, the evidence of his financial mismanagement, it's all coming together. The reality hit me. The legal process was about to put Brian and Tiffany under a microscope. Their motives, lies, and greed would be scrutinized. For the first time, I felt not just prepared, but justified, validated, and ready to confront them in a formal setting where their manipulations would hold no sway. That night, I lay awake thinking of the months ahead. The fear had not vanished entirely, but it had shifted. It was no longer a paralyzing dread. It was a sharpened awareness, a vigilance fueled by preparation and truth. I realized that independence wasn't just about managing finances or maintaining a home. It was about asserting control over one's life, protecting oneself from those who would exploit love for selfish gain. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I whispered to myself, I will not be bullied. I will not be deceived. I am in control. The words felt powerful, a mantra for the trials ahead. The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived with a mix of nerves and determination. I woke early, brewing a pot of strong coffee, and carefully reviewed my notes, evidence files, and journal. Helen came by to check on me, offering a reassuring smile. You're prepared, she said. This is your moment to show the truth. I nodded, sipping the coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my chest as if fueling my courage. Sarah arrived soon after, carrying a thick binder of all the documentation we had gathered. Bank statements, moving company records, emails, voicemails, photographs, social media screenshots, and statements from neighbors. Each piece meticulously annotated. Every claim they make, we have proof to counter it, she said. Remember, Margaret, clarity and calmness will win this day, not anger. The courthouse was busy, the fluorescent lights humming above as people moved in and out. I felt a pang of anxiety, a reminder that despite all preparation, this confrontation would not be easy. But when I caught a glimpse of Brian and Tiffany sitting across the hall, whispering to their attorney, I also felt a spark of resolve. This was the moment to reclaim not just my home, but my dignity. The hearing began promptly. Judge Carmichael, her sharp gaze sweeping the room, called the case. Brian's attorney presented their argument first, painting a carefully constructed narrative of concern and urgency. Mrs. Sanderson is showing signs of paranoia, refusing reasonable assistance, and isolating herself, the lawyer intoned. Dr. Henshaw was called to testify, reiterating the previous garden encounter with a calm, measured voice, emphasizing subtle signs of cognitive decline. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the stand with confidence, taking a deep breath. Sarah guided me through each question, allowing me to answer slowly and clearly. Mrs. Sanderson, please describe your daily routine and activities, she began. I outlined my mornings in the garden, volunteer work at the library, my book club, and time spent with friends. I explained my financial management, showing the bank statements, bills paid on time, and careful budgeting. Sarah asked me about Brian and Tiffany's attempts to intervene. I spoke calmly, detailing the moving company incident, the Maldives vacation payment, and their repeated manipulations through emails, social media, and direct contact. Every document was presented, every photo, every receipt meticulously logged. The courtroom remained silent as the weight of the evidence settled. Then came the moment that felt like a turning point. Sarah presented proof of Brian's financial desperation. Unpaid debts, loan documents, and credit card statements revealing his attempts to access my home equity. The contrast between his claims of concern and the reality of his motives became impossible to ignore. I could see the color drain from Brian's face, his carefully constructed composure faltering. I was asked about my medical records and cognitive function. I presented a recent report from my physician confirming excellent health, mental acuity, and independence. I manage my home, my finances, and my daily life without issue, I stated firmly, looking directly at Brian. I am competent, independent, and fully capable of making decisions regarding my life and property. Sarah guided me through presenting witness statements. Helen, Clara, and Patricia's testimonies were read aloud, highlighting my social engagement, reliability, and sound judgment. The support group statements reinforced that what I was experiencing was not paranoia, but protection against financial exploitation. Each word added another layer of credibility to my position. When Brian took the stand again, his narrative seemed less convincing. Under Sarah's careful questioning, the inconsistencies emerged. Mr. Sanderson, she asked, you claim concern for your mother's well-being. Did you attempt to access her home equity to fund personal expenses? Brian hesitated, the room silent, and muttered an incomplete answer. Sarah pressed, calmly producing the evidence. The courtroom absorbed the contradiction, the stark difference between his claims and the reality of his actions. The emotional manipulation that Brian and Tiffany had relied upon, the guilt, the fabricated urgency, the pressure to give up independence, was now laid bare. Their attempts to portray themselves as victims backfired, each piece of evidence reinforcing the truth of my competence and their ulterior motives. As the hearing concluded for the day, I walked out with Helen and Sarah beside me. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. I realized that while the legal battle was not yet fully resolved, the momentum had shifted. The truth was on my side, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity and empowerment that I hadn't known since the initial confrontation. That evening, I returned to the sanctuary of my garden. Pruning the hydrangeas, I reflected on the transformation over the past weeks. Fear had been replaced by vigilance, anxiety by preparation, and despair by a growing sense of strength. Every email, every call, every confrontation had been a lesson, a reminder that independence was not just a privilege, but a right worth defending. I allowed myself a quiet smile as the sun dipped below the horizon. The battle was far from over, but I now knew something critical. No amount of manipulation, no threat of isolation or fear could shake the foundation I had rebuilt. My home, my life, and my autonomy were mine to protect, and I was ready to do so every step of the way. The following morning brought a renewed sense of purpose. I rose early, tending to the garden before breakfast, the crisp air clearing my mind. Helen called just to check in. "You're calm this morning," she said. "Good, that's exactly the state you want before court." I nodded, appreciating her presence even from afar. I had learned over these weeks that support, even if remote, was essential to maintain strength. When Sarah arrived, she carried a folder of additional evidence we had uncovered. "Margaret," she said, "we found more email correspondence and social media posts. They show a clear pattern of deceit and financial manipulation. Every interaction Brian and Tiffany had with you points to their self-interest, not your well-being." I took the folder, flipping carefully through each page, mentally noting how meticulously we had documented every encounter. The courthouse was slightly less crowded than the day before, giving a sense of quiet anticipation. Inside, Brian and Tiffany sat together, their expressions tense. Brian's jaw was tight and Tiffany avoided eye contact. I could feel the shift in energy, a subtle tremor of uncertainty in their demeanor. The judge entered promptly, calling the session to order. Kirkland began his argument, reiterating the same points from the prior day: concern for my safety, fear of isolation, and claims of erratic behavior. Dr. Henshaw followed, presenting her observations as before, carefully avoiding specifics about the Maldives or financial evidence, framing her testimony as a medical concern rather than a legal issue. Sarah stood confidently to cross-examine. "Dr. Henshaw," she began, "you observed Mrs. Sanderson in her garden, correct?" The doctor nodded. "And you assessed her based on that brief encounter, without reviewing her financial records, volunteer work, or social activities?" "Yes, but—" The doctor hesitated. Sarah continued, "So your assessment is based on incomplete information. Are you aware that Mrs. Sanderson manages all her finances, maintains her home, and actively participates in community programs?" Dr. Henshaw looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Next came Brian's colleague, called to testify again. Sarah questioned him on the apparent contradiction between Brian's supposed concern and the documented financial mismanagement. The evidence, emails, bank statements, and social media posts, was presented clearly. Each piece dismantled the narrative Brian and Tiffany were trying to create. Brian's turn to testify again was tense. Under Sarah's precise questioning, he struggled. "You claim to have been worried about your mother," she pressed. "Yet you accessed her financial records without permission and attempted to use her home equity for personal expenses. How is this concern?" Brian faltered, words stammering out. I thought it was necessary." He looked toward Tiffany, seeking support, but even she seemed unsure now. Sarah then introduced the moving company invoices. "You hired movers to relocate Mrs. Sanderson without consent, correct?" she asked. Brian admitted it, saying, "I thought it would show her how easier life could be elsewhere." "And did that include a $47,000 payment for a luxury vacation you claimed was canceled?" Sarah's tone remained calm, professional. Brian's face paled. Social media screenshots and confirmation emails appeared on the screen behind him. The courtroom murmured, the evidence was irrefutable. Tiffany was called next. She attempted to explain her emails and messages of concern, trying to frame them as love and support. But Sarah countered, presenting the timeline and inconsistencies. "These communications coincide directly with attempts to pressure your mother for financial gain. The intent is clear." Tiffany's voice faltered, the polished performance cracking under scrutiny. Finally, Sarah guided me to the stand. I spoke clearly and deliberately, outlining my independence, competence, and daily routines. I walked through my financial management, volunteer work, and social engagements. Every statement reinforced the reality. I was fully capable of making my own decisions. "I am competent," I concluded, looking at Brian and Tiffany, "and I will not be coerced into surrendering my property or my independence." The judge listened intently, reviewing each document, photograph, and testimonial. I felt a quiet strength as I returned to my seat, knowing that the truth, meticulously documented, would speak louder than the fabricated narrative of fear and manipulation. After the recess, the judge asked for closing statements. Kirkland's attempt to humanize Brian and Tiffany fell flat under the weight of the evidence. Sarah's summary was succinct, powerful, and unassailable. She emphasized the documented financial exploitation, the attempted fraud, and my demonstrable independence and competence. As we left the courthouse that day, I felt a surge of relief. While the final decision was pending, the momentum had shifted unmistakably. I had stood my ground, faced my son and his wife in court, and presented undeniable proof of my autonomy and strength. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe, the sun warming my shoulders as Helen and Sarah walked beside me. That evening, back in my sanctuary of a garden, I reflected on the weeks of preparation, confrontation, and evidence gathering. Each challenge had tested me, each manipulation sharpened my vigilance. I realized that independence was not a passive state. It required courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to truth. And as I pruned the hydrangeas, feeling the soft dirt beneath my nails, I made a silent vow. No matter the outcome, I would continue protecting my autonomy, my home, and my life. This battle was far from over, but I was ready. I was resolute, and I knew, deep in my heart, that standing firm in the face of betrayal was not just necessary. It was the truest expression of love for myself. The day of the final hearing arrived with a tense clarity. I woke before dawn, the soft light spilling through my curtains, illuminating my home like a calm before the storm. Helen called as I sipped my tea. "Remember, Margaret," she said gently, "this is about truth, evidence, and your independence. Stay calm, stay steady." Her words were a balm, reminding me that the battle was not just legal but deeply personal. Sarah arrived promptly, files in hand, her confidence radiating. "Margaret, we've reviewed everything again. Every email, every bank statement, every photograph is organized and ready. There will be no surprises today. Your voice and your actions will carry the weight of truth." I nodded, feeling the reassurance of preparation anchor my nerves. Each step we had taken over the past months, from documenting interactions with Brian and Tiffany to gathering testimonials from my book club and volunteer colleagues, had led to this moment. At the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Brian and Tiffany were present, their earlier confidence noticeably eroded. Brian avoided eye contact, fingers tapping nervously on the table. Tiffany's expression was carefully controlled, but a subtle twitch of her lips betrayed her anxiety. They were no longer the polished, charming manipulators I had first encountered. They were cornered. Judge Carmichael entered promptly, her presence commanding attention. The room fell silent. "We are here for the final hearing regarding the guardianship petition filed by Mr. Brian Sanderson," she announced. "I expect clarity, honesty, and brevity from all parties." She sat, eyes sharp, scanning each face in the room as if she could see the truth behind the layers of deception. Kirkland opened for Brian, emphasizing concern and care, a narrative of fear and responsibility. "Your Honor," he said, "my client's actions were motivated entirely by love for his mother. Mrs. Sanderson has become increasingly isolated, struggling to maintain her household. We merely sought to ensure her safety and well-being." His words flowed smoothly, but there was a faint quiver in his tone, a shadow of doubt, perhaps, that he could not fully mask. Sarah stood, her composure unwavering. "Your Honor," she began, "Mrs. Sanderson is a competent, independent adult who has demonstrated exemplary management of her finances, her home, and her personal life. The evidence shows deliberate attempts at coercion and financial exploitation by Mr. Sanderson and Miss Tiffany Sanderson. The intention was not care, but self-interest. We have full documentation to support this claim." Dr. Henshaw took the stand again, attempting to frame my behaviors as symptomatic of cognitive decline. Sarah's cross-examination was precise. "Dr. Henshaw, you observed Mrs. Sanderson on a single day in her garden. Did you review her financial records, social activities, or volunteer work before forming your opinion?" The doctor hesitated. "No, only the encounter." Sarah pressed further. "Wouldn't a proper assessment require comprehensive information rather than isolated observation?" The doctor's smile faltered, and a subtle shift in the courtroom dynamics was palpable. Brian was called to testify again. His voice, once commanding, now lacked conviction. Sarah methodically questioned the timing of his actions against documented evidence of luxury, spending, credit card statements, vacation bookings, and attempts to leverage my home equity. Each contradiction became a chisel, slowly carving away the facade he had maintained for months. Tiffany was next. Sarah presented screenshots of messages and social media posts, revealing calculated manipulation, attempts to induce guilt, and pressure to relinquish property. Tiffany's responses, polished and controlled in private, now crumbled under the clear, factual presentation. The weight of the evidence was undeniable, each detail meticulously chronicled. Then it was my turn. I walked to the stand deliberately, each step reinforcing my resolve. I explained my daily routine, my volunteer work, my book club engagements, and my financial management. I outlined my independence, my capability to make decisions, and my refusal to be coerced. I am competent, I stated clearly, eyes meeting the judges. I manage my life, my finances, and my home responsibly. I will not surrender my property under duress or deception. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Brian and Tiffany sat, expressions taut with tension, as the judge carefully reviewed every document, photo, and testimonial. I felt a quiet surge of triumph, knowing that the truth, backed by evidence, was more powerful than any emotional manipulation. After a brief recess, Judge Carmichael returned. The weight of justice hung in the air as she announced, "I have reviewed all evidence presented. There is no merit to this petition. Mrs. Sanderson is competent, financially stable, and living independently. The petition appears to be a thinly veiled attempt at financial exploitation. The guardianship request is denied, and Mr. Sanderson is ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by Mrs. Sanderson. Additionally, this matter is being referred to Adult Protective Services for further investigation into potential financial exploitation." Brian's face drained of color. Tiffany's composure broke, tears of frustration and defeat streamed down her cheeks. The courtroom was stunned into silence, a moment of profound vindication settling over me. As we walked out, Sarah's hand on my shoulder, I felt a release of tension I hadn't known was possible. My home, my autonomy, and my dignity were intact. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and deceit and emerged stronger. The road ahead would require continued vigilance, but the foundation was secure. I had fought not just for property, but for respect, agency, and self-determination. And I had won. The following weeks were a strange mix of relief and vigilance. I returned to my daily routines with a renewed sense of purpose, but Sarah reminded me not to let my guard down. "Margaret, they've lost in court, yes," she said, "but desperation can lead to irrational actions. Continue documenting, continue safeguarding yourself." I nodded, appreciating her cautious optimism. Every security camera, every logged email, every documented interaction was a shield against potential future attempts. Helen and Clara continued their steadfast support, checking in regularly, often bearing warm meals or stopping by for tea. Patricia, from the support group, encouraged me to share my story publicly, to warn other seniors of the subtle tactics used by those seeking to exploit family trust. I was hesitant at first. Vulnerability had always been private. But gradually, I realized the power of visibility. My story could help others. Brian and Tiffany, meanwhile, receded from my immediate life, but updates reached me in fragments. Through mutual acquaintances and social channels, I learned that the fallout from the court case had been severe. Brian's firm had placed him on administrative leave, his colleagues whispering about the investigation into his conduct. Tiffany's brokerage quietly ended her employment, citing organizational restructuring, though everyone knew the real reason. The Maldives vacation, once a symbol of their audacious plan, was finally canceled permanently, $47,000 gone, unrecoverable. Even in their absence, I felt a subtle psychological aftereffect. The lingering tension of betrayal, the quiet awareness that the people I had loved most could manipulate and deceive me so thoroughly. I focused on rebuilding, on reclaiming joy in my home and my life. The garden, which had been my sanctuary during the months of turmoil, flourished under renewed attention. I planted vibrant hydrangeas, towering sunflowers, and delicate roses, each bloom a small act of reclamation, a personal triumph over the chaos they had tried to impose. My book club grew, not just in numbers but in intimacy. We began hosting literary evenings twice a month, filling my dining room with laughter, debates, and the comforting familiarity of friendship untainted by ulterior motives. Discussions ranged from classic novels to modern mysteries, but beneath every conversation was an unspoken acknowledgement of resilience, survival, and the quiet power of autonomy. One afternoon, Helen arrived with an envelope. "It came for you," she said gently. Inside was a letter from Brian, handwritten, brief, and suffused with bitterness. "Mom, we lost everything. The townhouse, our jobs, our friends. Everything collapsed. I know you think I deserved this. Maybe I do, but I need you to understand I never meant to hurt you. I was desperate, drowning, and made terrible choices. I am sorry." I read it twice, then filed it with the other documentation. No response was necessary. The letter was more a confession than a plea. Sarah called later that evening. "Margaret, they're ready to negotiate a settlement. Brian and Tiffany are offering to formally relinquish any claim to your estate, and Brian will undergo financial counseling as part of the agreement." I considered it briefly. My patience had been tested, my boundaries challenged, and my independence had been under threat. But this settlement ensured that my future would remain secure. "Draw up the agreement," I said, "but include one condition: Brian must provide proof of completion of a financial counseling program. He needs to learn responsibility." Weeks later, the papers were signed. Brian and Tiffany forfeited all claims, agreed to supervised visitation only, and Brian enrolled in a court-mandated counseling program. I updated my will to reflect these changes, designating the house to a charity focused on protecting seniors from financial abuse. The act felt both symbolic and liberating. I was reclaiming not just property, but a legacy, a measure of control over what had been threatened. Life slowly settled into a rhythm of joy and autonomy. I threw myself into home renovations: new kitchen cabinets, refreshed bathrooms, a sunroom where I could read while overlooking my flourishing garden. Each improvement was a declaration of freedom and self-determination. My book club and volunteer work provided purpose and connection, while the security systems installed earlier offered peace of mind. I had built a fortress of both physical safety and emotional resilience. The house, once a battlefield, became a sanctuary. The garden parties, the laughter of friends, the quiet pride of independence, all served as reminders that control and dignity, once threatened, could be restored and even enhanced. The lessons I had learned through months of manipulation and deceit became a framework not just for self-protection, but for empowerment. I realized that boundaries, courage, and clarity of purpose were the true measures of strength. The weeks following the settlement were almost surreal in their calm. I woke each morning with a sense of clarity that had been absent during the months of manipulation and betrayal. Sarah reminded me regularly: "Margaret, stay vigilant, but also allow yourself the joy you fought so hard to reclaim." And I did. The small victories, the ability to walk through my home without fear or suspicion, became powerful affirmations of resilience. Helen, Clara, and Patricia remained my anchors. Helen often brought fresh-baked pastries and stories from her grandchildren. Clara shared her practical wisdom on matters of home security and personal safety, and Patricia encouraged me to expand my volunteer work. Together, they created a circle of genuine care, devoid of manipulation, a stark contrast to the deceit I'd endured from Brian and Tiffany. My home, once a stage for confrontation, now thrummed with warmth, laughter, and connection. One afternoon, I received a call from the senior literacy program at the library. They asked me to conduct a series of workshops teaching older adults how to navigate the internet safely. Scams, identity theft, and even subtle manipulation tactics like those I had experienced were central to the curriculum. Initially hesitant, I agreed. Sharing my story anonymously at first, then openly as trust built, I found that many attendees resonated with my experiences. Their questions were insightful, their gratitude tangible. It became more than a volunteer project, it became a mission. In parallel, updates about Brian and Tiffany trickled in through mutual acquaintances. Brian had started his court-mandated financial counseling, and while progress was slow, there were signs he was learning to manage his impulses and debts. Tiffany, though humbled, was attempting to rebuild her career on a smaller scale. While their lives were no longer the glamorous, carefree existence they had envisioned, it was evident that the consequences of their actions had profoundly reshaped them. One quiet evening, as I tended to my roses, I reflected on the transformation my home had undergone. The renovations, the sunroom, the kitchen, all manifestations of reclaimed control. Every flower in my garden, from the towering sunflowers to the delicate hydrangeas, seemed to mirror the personal growth I had nurtured. I had fought to protect not only my property, but also my dignity and autonomy. Each bloom, each step forward in my life, was a testament to that struggle and triumph. The book club, which had expanded to bi monthly meetings, became more than a literary gathering. It became a haven for discussion, connection, and laughter. Friends shared meals, celebrated small victories, and supported each other through personal challenges. In this space, I realized that family could be chosen as well as inherited. Genuine care, loyalty, and love were not automatically guaranteed by blood, they were cultivated through trust and respect. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from Brian. I held it with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. His handwriting was tentative, almost apologetic. Mom, I hope you're happy. I hope your house and your lawyer and your life are everything you want them to be. We're barely managing, but perhaps we deserve it. I need you to know I'm sorry for everything. I read it slowly, filed it carefully, and made no reply. Words, after months of manipulation and deceit, could not alter the reality of his actions or their consequences. Sarah, as ever, reminded me of the importance of boundaries. Margaret, the letter is a reflection, not a request. Protect your peace, you've earned it. I nodded, appreciating her guidance. Each interaction with Brian and Tiffany, even post settlement, required careful navigation. While I no longer feared immediate exploitation, the psychological impact lingered. Vigilance and documentation remained prudent, a necessary guard for the future. Life gradually settled into a rhythm of joy, autonomy, and engagement. I poured energy into my garden, my book club, and volunteer work while embracing new social opportunities. I even began occasional outings with David, the retired professor who made me laugh, reminding me that companionship could exist without manipulation or self interest. It felt liberating to be valued for who I was, rather than what I possessed. One sunny afternoon, I reflected on the path I had traversed. From betrayal and manipulation to victory and restoration, the journey had been exhausting yet transformative. My independence, once threatened, had been solidified through courage, careful planning, and the unwavering support of true friends. The house, my sanctuary, had become a symbol not just of property, but of resilience, empowerment, and the unyielding strength of standing firm in one's truth. Autumn arrived with a crispness that seemed to mirror my renewed perspective on life. The garden, once bursting with summer blooms, had shifted to shades of amber and gold. I spent mornings raking leaves, listening to the satisfying crunch beneath my boots, feeling the rhythm of the seasons as a reflection of my own journey. Each fallen leaf felt symbolic, a letting go of the fear, anger, and manipulation that had once suffocated me. The book club flourished in the cooler months. Members brought autumn-themed treats, and our discussions became more lively, infused with personal anecdotes and debates about the resilience of characters we admired. Helen, ever attentive, remarked one evening, "Margaret, you carry yourself with a strength that inspires all of us. We see it in your garden, in your home, and in the way you've reclaimed your life." I smiled, deeply touched. Their words reminded me that the community I had cultivated was a powerful force of affirmation and love, something Brian and Tiffany could never provide. Volunteer work continued to anchor me. At the library, I began hosting workshops specifically focused on financial awareness for seniors. Using my experience as a case study, I taught participants to recognize warning signs of manipulation, to question requests for access to their property, and to document interactions that seemed suspicious. Attendance grew steadily, and soon I was asked to present at regional senior centers, spreading awareness far beyond my immediate community. It was empowering to turn a deeply personal violation into a source of education and protection for others. Socially, life gained new textures. David and I had settled into a comfortable routine of afternoon teas, museum visits, and quiet evenings watching plays at the community theater. There was laughter and conversation without pretense, without hidden agendas. He never asked about my finances, my estate, or the past struggles with Brian. I realized how restorative it was to engage with someone who valued my company and intellect above all else. One chilly morning, while pruning the roses in the sunroom, I received a phone call from Linda Martinez at Adult Protective Services. The investigation into Brian's attempted financial exploitation had concluded. "Mrs. Sanderson," she said, "your documentation and court records were crucial. The case is officially closed, and we've flagged Brian for follow-up in the event of future financial activities involving elderly clients. Your actions likely prevented further harm, not just to yourself but potentially to others." Relief washed over me. The legal validation of my experiences, the acknowledgement that what Brian had attempted constituted elder abuse, reinforced the sense that I had not only protected myself, but had also set a precedent for vigilance and accountability. Amidst these developments, the holidays approached. I debated inviting anyone over, hesitant to engage with family for fear of reminders of the past betrayal. Eventually, I decided to host a small gathering with my friends from the book club and the senior literacy program. The evening was filled with warmth, stories, laughter, and gratitude. No masks, no pretense, only genuine connection. Helen toasted to Margaret, whose courage and integrity remind us all that boundaries can be both firm and loving. My heart swelled with gratitude. Brian and Tiffany's lives, as updates reached me through mutual acquaintances, continued to unfold in stark contrast. Bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, and professional setbacks painted a picture of harsh consequences. While I felt no pleasure in their suffering, I recognized it as a natural outcome of choices made without foresight or ethical consideration. Each new detail, rather than provoking anger, strengthened my resolve to protect myself and to educate others. One afternoon, I was contacted by a local community organization that focused on elder advocacy. They had heard about my workshops and requested that I speak at an upcoming panel discussion on elder financial abuse. Nervous yet determined, I accepted. Standing before an audience of community leaders, social workers, and seniors, I recounted my experiences with Brian and Tiffany, emphasizing the warning signs, the importance of documentation, and the value of community support. The response was immediate: questions, applause, and the shared understanding that empowerment comes not just from personal victories, but from equipping others with knowledge. The garden, now dusted with the first frost, became a place of reflection each evening. I would sip tea in the sunroom, watching the branches silhouetted against the amber sky, feeling a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. The house, once the scene of conflict and manipulation, had become a sanctuary of triumph, growth, and self respect. It was mine, not just in ownership, but in spirit, heart, and memory. Winter settled over the neighborhood with a quiet intensity, the first snow transforming the familiar streets into a serene white canvas. Walking through, it became a meditative ritual, each crunch of snow beneath my boots a reminder of the stability and strength I had reclaimed. The garden, now dormant, seemed to rest in the promise of spring, much like my own spirit after the turbulence with Brian and Tiffany. The workshops at the library continued to expand. Seniors came from neighboring towns to attend my sessions on financial literacy, identity protection, and fraud prevention. I introduced role playing exercises where participants practiced responding to manipulative requests from relatives, reinforcing boundaries and asserting independence. The pride in their eyes, when they realized their right to autonomy could be defended, was more rewarding than any material gain I had ever experienced. I often thought about how my confrontation with Brian had become a real world curriculum, proof that vigilance, documentation, and legal preparedness were tools of empowerment, not fear. Socially, life was rich with human connection. David and I had settled into a warm rhythm of companionship. We cooked together, explored art exhibits, and shared long conversations that stretched into the night. There was no pressure, no expectation, only genuine appreciation for each other's presence. One evening, as we watched the snow gently fall outside the sunroom windows, David said softly, "Margaret, you've transformed this house into more than a home. It's a sanctuary for you and everyone who comes here." I nodded, feeling the full weight of those words, aware of the journey that had led me here. Unexpectedly, I received an invitation from the City Council to speak at a community forum about elder financial exploitation. The panel included legal experts, social workers, and advocacy organizations. I recounted my story, emphasizing the importance of documentation, trusted support networks, and proactive legal measures. Questions poured in, and the dialogue was intense yet constructive. One attendee, a woman in her late 70s, approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "You saved me from trusting the wrong people," she said. "I have my finances and my independence because of your talk." That moment crystallized the impact of what I had endured. It had not only protected me, but empowered countless others. Meanwhile, life updates about Brian and Tiffany continued to trickle in. The bankruptcy proceedings dragged on painfully, and their rental apartment offered little comfort or privacy. Brian struggled to meet his new financial obligations despite attending court mandated counseling. Tiffany's job as an administrative assistant paid a fraction of her former income, and her once flourishing social media presence now reflected caution and humility. Each report, while initially jarring, reminded me why I had acted decisively and firmly. Sometimes tough love is necessary, even when it's aimed at one's own children. The holiday season brought visitors to the house, but I carefully curated the guest list. Friends from the book club, neighbors, library volunteers, and members of the support group gathered for a warm celebration. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, storytelling, and gratitude for resilience. Helen toasted to Margaret, whose courage reminds us that boundaries can be both protective and empowering. I felt a deep sense of belonging, surrounded not by obligation or manipulation, but by people who genuinely cared for my well being. One January morning, I received an unexpected letter from Brian, postmarked from a small town far from our city. The handwriting was familiar yet hesitant. Inside, he admitted, in a terse and subdued tone, that he had completed his financial counseling program and was attempting to rebuild his life. He offered no requests, no manipulative appeals, simply a brief acknowledgement of accountability. I filed the letter with the rest of my documentation. It was a quiet reminder that, while consequences can be harsh, growth sometimes emerges from the harshest experiences. The house itself transformed alongside my evolving life. Winter projects included insulating the sunroom for year round comfort, installing energy efficient lighting, and adding cozy reading nooks filled with plush chairs and soft blankets. Each improvement reflected not only my taste, but my autonomy. It was a daily affirmation of the freedom I had fought to protect. Reflecting on the past year, I realized that the battles with Brian and Tiffany had altered my perspective in profound ways. I had learned to recognize manipulation, to assert boundaries, and to value self respect over imposed familial obligations. I had transformed fear and betrayal into education, empowerment, and community service. The sanctuary I had created was not just physical, it was emotional, social, and legal. Spring arrived with a delicate explosion of color, the garden waking up from its winter slumber. Crocuses, tulips, and daffodils pushed through the soft soil, each bloom a small miracle that mirrored my own renewal. I spent mornings tending to the flower beds, pruning shrubs, and planning new garden layouts. The sunroom, now fully functional, became my sanctuary for morning coffee, planning workshops, or simply observing the changing sky. Each day felt purposeful, free from fear, guilt, or manipulation. The support group meetings had grown in number and scope. Seniors from across the county joined, many bringing their adult children along for educational sessions. I witnessed firsthand the transformative effect of awareness and preparation. People shared stories of subtle coercion, deceptive financial requests, and intimidation, and we dissected strategies to counteract these threats. I felt a profound sense of mission, turning my own painful experience into a beacon for others. David and I had begun hosting small gatherings in the sunroom. Book readings, tea afternoons, and quiet concerts with local musicians became common. These events reinforced a community of trust and mutual respect. Unlike the strained family ties I had once clung to, these relationships were chosen freely, based on shared interests and genuine care. One evening, as we listened to a cello performance, David whispered, "This is life at its richest, isn't it?" I smiled, knowing he was right. Meanwhile, updates about Brian and Tiffany continued to trickle through informal channels. Their attempts to regain stability were slow and fraught with complications. Brian, despite completing the financial counseling program, struggled with budgeting and repaying debt. Tiffany moved between jobs, each less prestigious than the last, eventually accepting a position in administrative support that offered minimal autonomy. Their social presence diminished, with fewer invitations, muted social media interactions, and whispers among mutual acquaintances about financial collapse. I occasionally pondered the emotional landscape between us. The letters from Brian, sparse and carefully phrased, reflected someone beginning to grasp accountability. Yet they also revealed lingering entitlement and defensiveness. Tiffany, though quieter, still sought validation and a return to influence, though reality had tempered her ambitions. These reflections reinforced why I had established firm boundaries. Love without accountability can be dangerous when combined with desperation. The Margaret Sanderson Foundation for Elder Financial Protection had begun its operations. Initially small, the foundation focused on legal assistance, educational workshops, and creating accessible resources for seniors. My personal story served as both the foundation's inspiration and its educational cornerstone. I participated in panel discussions, webinars, and community outreach events, emphasizing practical steps to prevent elder exploitation. Watching our work influence real change felt profoundly rewarding. The book club thrived, too. Our gatherings now incorporated discussions on ethics, psychology, and real life resilience. Members shared experiences beyond literature, bonding over common challenges and victories. Helen, Clara, and Patricia had become co organizers in many activities, their dedication reflecting the depth of connection that could exist outside familial obligation. We became a true community, a chosen family built on trust, respect, and shared values. As summer approached, I focused on long term projects. The sunroom received built in bookshelves filled with carefully curated volumes spanning literature, self help, and historical accounts of resilience. The garden expanded with a small greenhouse to start seedlings year round. Volunteer programs at the library increased, including a digital literacy curriculum specifically designed to prevent online fraud. Each achievement reminded me of the autonomy I had regained and the future I could shape on my own terms. One warm June evening, David and I walked through the neighborhood discussing plans for a joint summer project, a public garden initiative combining horticulture with community engagement. We envisioned seniors mentoring youth in gardening, connecting generations, and fostering responsibility and care. This initiative, born from my love for gardening and my commitment to community, symbolized the blend of personal joy and social contribution that now defined my life. Occasionally, I thought of Brian and Tiffany, but the emotion was muted, replaced by a sense of closure and focus on growth. Their choices had consequences, and I had ensured those consequences were real, fair, and documented. The legal safeguards, court victories, and the Foundation's work collectively created a barrier against any future attempts at manipulation. My life was no longer dictated by fear or coercion, but by deliberate, joyful engagement with the world around me. Summer ripened fully, with long days stretching lazily and evenings filled with the scent of roses and honeysuckle. My sunroom, now adorned with climbing wisteria and comfortable chairs, became the hub for quiet reflection, planning, and connection. Mornings were spent in the garden, tending to new blooms, inspecting vegetables in the raised beds, or sketching plans for upcoming workshops. Each task reinforced my independence, my competence, and my joy in simple accomplishments. The Margaret Sanderson Foundation had grown beyond my initial expectations. We had partnered with local law firms, senior centers, and banks to create workshops on elder financial protection. I often shared my story as a cautionary tale, emphasizing the subtlety of emotional manipulation and the importance of documentation. Seniors who had once felt powerless were now empowered, equipped with knowledge and legal resources. Volunteers from the community, inspired by our mission, brought energy, ideas, and manpower, turning small events into meaningful, large scale initiatives. David remained a constant, supportive presence. Our relationship was easy, grounded in humor, mutual respect, and shared interests. There were no discussions of money, inheritance, or possessions, just companionship and the enjoyment of life. Some afternoons, he accompanied me to the library, where I taught seniors to navigate the internet safely. On other days, he helped with the garden, his curiosity about plants and patience with trial and error mirroring my own early enthusiasm decades ago. The book club had evolved into a cornerstone of my social life. We now met twice a month, with lively debates spanning literature, psychology, and life experiences. New members joined, drawn not only by the books but by the supportive atmosphere and the real world application of lessons in resilience and autonomy. Helen, Clara, and Patricia continued to play central roles, organizing logistics, outreach, and follow up support. They were not just friends, they were family, reliable and nurturing in ways Brian and Tiffany never could be. Occasional updates about Brian and Tiffany filtered in through informal channels. They had moved again, this time to a smaller, rented apartment on the outskirts of town. Brian's work in insurance paid minimally compared to his former finance position, and Tiffany's administrative role offered no prestige. Socially, they were isolated. Former friends and colleagues, once dazzled by luxury, kept distance. Vague social media posts hinted at stress and adaptation, but they never reached the level of indulgence or entitlement they had before. Their fall was a stark contrast to my thriving, intentional life. Letters from Brian had ceased. The final bitter message, filed months prior, was all that remained, a reminder of choices, consequences, and the limits of forgiveness. Occasionally, I reflected on the son I had raised versus the man he had become. I mourned the loss of potential, of trust, and of a shared bond. But grief was now tempered by empowerment and peace. I had reclaimed my life, my property, and my dignity. The house, the garden, the sunroom, they were symbols of resilience, not wealth to be exploited. Summer evenings were filled with small celebrations. Garden parties for friends, volunteers, and foundation supporters became an annual tradition. We dined under string lights, drank wine, laughed until our sides ached, and shared stories of courage, survival, and growth. At one such gathering, a young woman approached me, teary eyed, thanking me for educating her and her parents about elder financial protection. Moments like these reinforced that my experiences, though painful, had created tangible good in the world. I had also begun mentoring other women who had faced family betrayal. One woman, whose daughter had attempted to manipulate her finances, sought advice on documenting interactions and setting legal boundaries. I guided her through steps I had learned: keeping meticulous records, securing independent legal counsel, maintaining personal autonomy, and establishing clear boundaries. Watching her regain confidence reminded me of my own journey and reinforced the importance of sharing knowledge gained through hardship. On quiet nights, I reflected on what freedom truly meant. It wasn't merely living without interference. It was living deliberately, with clarity, agency, and purpose. My house was mine not only because of the court ruling, but because I had rebuilt the emotional, intellectual, and social structures around it. I was no longer trapped by fear, guilt, or obligation. My autonomy was absolute. As the year turned, I hosted a final symbolic garden gathering. Guests included foundation volunteers, book club members, library colleagues, and David. We celebrated growth, perseverance, and community. I stood in the center, looking at faces that genuinely cared, and realized I had everything I needed. Wealth had not made me happy. Connection, competence, and freedom had. The Margaret Sanderson Foundation continued to expand, providing legal aid, workshops, and advocacy for seniors nationwide. My legacy was no longer defined by property, but by empowerment. I had turned betrayal into opportunity, loss into teaching, and fear into advocacy. Brian and Tiffany faded from my immediate concerns. Their consequences were self imposed, their recovery their own responsibility. I walked through my garden one last time before sunset, the flowers glowing in the warm light. The air was scented with roses and fresh herbs. I felt a profound sense of completion. My house, my garden, my community, and my life were intact, thriving, and mine. I had fought, documented, and defended, not for revenge, but for survival and integrity. And now, finally, I was free. I looked at the sky, streaked with orange and pink, and whispered softly to myself, I am stronger than I ever believed. I am free. I am whole.